Hey, and welcome to Tradecraft Tuesday. If you have made it here to see this, you probably have figured out our schedule. It's every Tuesday at noon. We are your hosts. I'm Chris Bisnet.
Kyle Hansloven.
And we come to you every week at noon, and we try to talk and give some interesting discussion about tradecraft that attackers and malware are using to try and get at your systems. And hopefully from this you can take away, if not an interesting half hour, you can take away something that you can potentially use and try and go find attackers in your own networks or on your own systems. So we try and come up with new ideas. A lot of times we try to use something that's in the news, like this week, something recent. But if you have any ideas for us to cover, you can tweet at us. We're at Tradecraft2s. We also have an email address. It's tradecrafttuesday@huntress.labs.com. So some people last week requested we do some stuff on PowerShell. We don't have that ready yet. We're still doing some research, making sure we know what we're talking about before we just get on here and do some stuff. So I think the first thing we're going to start off today is Kyle's going to talk a little bit about antivirus. Actually, before we get into that, let me go back a little bit. So today the show is kind of about antivirus and how, in some cases, using it can actually make you less secure due to vulnerabilities in the antivirus. Now, we're not suggesting that everyone just run out and uninstall their antivirus and everything. That won't necessarily make you any better, but they, just like all software, they have bugs, and sometimes it actually makes you worse. So with that said, go ahead. If
we take a look at the news this week, it's been, I think Tavis has kind of been headlining with some of the TrendMicro code execution bugs, and we'll definitely touch on that. And because of all that interest there on antivirus, as well as some books being published more recently in regards to antivirus exploitation, we figured we'd touch on that a little bit. And one of the first ones that has come up, even in Metasploit framework, has been just a good old-fashioned exclusion bypassing. So that's the idea that antivirus, it's great, it's rock solid, until it actually goes and hoses up maybe some in-house developed software, or maybe a particular application that just doesn't play nice. So most antivirus allows you the option to say, hey, I want to exclude this particular file, or this particular directory, or maybe even a regex if it's got a really fancy version. And what's interesting about that is exclusion bypassing is important both for defense and for offense. And we've seen malware in the past have used exclusion bypassing just to say, hey, I know by default Microsoft won't catch me in this directory. So as long as I put my malicious software in this directory, I will be able to get execution. At the same time, that's a really useful utility to enumerate that for a defender. Because if you know where you're vulnerable, there's no reason you can't use that same knowledge to be able to programmatically detect that type of software, or maybe abnormalities in these same directories. So with that said, the very first link I'm going to post is a blog from Security Padawan here. And this blog was interesting. It's just calling attention to recent additions to Metasploit's Enum Excluded. So the idea behind it is, in its current state, it allows, through Metasploit to enumerate, hey, where's being, excluded by default with Microsoft Security Essentials, Microsoft Defender, and I believe Semantic Endpoint Protection is on that list as well. And the reason I call attention to that through that link is back to what I said before. If you know by default that certain directories are being excluded, you should put some extra scrutiny. I'm not saying manual scrutiny. Across an enterprise, that would just be unachievable. However, through some automation, whether through WMIC or SCCM or some type of automated software suite, there's no reason that you shouldn't be keeping an eye, in case a new file shows up in that directory or something along those lines.
Yeah. So are you saying, I guess from an attacker's point of view or a pen tester's point of view, these exclusion lists, are they just like solely directories where I just drop a file in some directory and like it won't be scanned by antivirus? Are we talking about registry keys? Like how do the exclusion lists work?
Gotcha. It's really interesting. So most of the time, the interface to the user is going to be through the UI in the antivirus to add this exclusion. And some of the exclusions allow you to actually say, hey, I want to whitelist this whole directory or this particular file. But you could also whitelist, for instance, some registry keys in certain AV. The next link I'm posting here real quick is one on the SANS InfoSec forums, which has a legit user asking this, how do I make sure that no malware is running in these exclusion portions or excluded portions? And how do I make sure only approved exclusions are there? So answering your question, Chris, sometimes it's just as simple as a registry key that the antivirus has that points to this directory should be excluded. And that's really interesting because if I, as an attacker, have escalated to a certain privilege level, I may be able to add my own exclusions programmatically just to the registry alone.
Yeah.
Or maybe I can append a list if, for instance, it takes a list of directories.
Sure. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I see the intended use. It's for like custom in-house developed things and stuff like that. But it seems, especially if you're doing like a whole directory and not even a file name or even better, like a specific hash, and say like this specific file with this SHA-1 hash is allowed to run. That just seems like, I don't know, it seems too broad to me. I don't know.
Yeah, Kaspersky calls it out in a blog where they actually start talking about these recommendations. And Microsoft even has some recommendations of files like on an Exchange server, you should exclude these files. But some of the rules are as restrictive as like, this particular file name. I haven't seen any that are like this particular file hash or list of hashes. And some of them are just as wide open that it could start with the letter res *.log, which is ripe for picking for somebody like, me or an offender to be able to get in there and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to make this res foobar.log. And maybe that's my covert store where I will store exfilled data. So I'll post the link to that PDF here as well from Kaspersky, where they actually address and they say, hey, this is a fickle matter. You could weaken your system with these exclusions. At the same time, you'll get additional stability out of adding it. So it's really up to the reader to decide what is right for their enterprise.
Yeah.
So with that said, Chris, if I was talking about these applications, and sometimes there's some protection mechanisms around these registry keys or something. And I think that segues really good into some of the TrendMicro exploits we saw this week. You want to cover that at all about, if I was TrendMicro and I had a protected registry key, it's assumed that the TrendMicro application itself would be allowed to write to these registry keys.
Sure.
And I think your segment here covers that really well.
Yeah. So what Kyle's talking about is a bug recently published by Tavis Ormandy of the Google Project Zero. For anybody who's not familiar with Project Zero, it's a Google-funded project where basically they're trying to find vulnerabilities in software used by Google and Google employees. And what the stated goal of it is to make the internet a safer place for everyone. So Tavis has recently been looking at antivirus products, and this time it was specifically TrendMicro, and he found that they have a product that installs with their TrendMicro stuff. It's called Password Manager. And the idea, as TrendMicro puts it, is to make a secure service where you can store your passwords without having to just store them in the browser. A lot of times you put in the password, the browser will come up and say, like, do you want me to store this, for the future? Instead of that, you can use this TrendMicro service that will do some of that stuff for you. So the problem is it registers a Node.js server. It runs it locally as a service. And you can actually attack it from the browser because it's listening on a local port. So using just 3 lines of JavaScript, you can write an AJAX request that will call out to this Node.js server and execute arbitrary commands on the system. So I will post a link to the actual Project Zero bug report. So if you want to go take a look at it, it's a pretty interesting read. There's a lot of back and forth with Tavis and the TrendMicro guys, him saying, this is a bug, this is a big deal. And I actually find it kind of funny because there's a lot of manager corporate speak, where they, instead of saying like, oh my gosh, you're right, this is a bug, they try to cover it up. Not like cover it up, but just say like, oh yes, we are creating a plan to figure out how to determine if this is a vulnerability and how we would mitigate this. And, like it goes on and on, and it's pretty interesting. But he actually wrote what I thought was kind of a funny joke. It was a proof of concept to actually show this. In the proof of concept, it actually calls the uninstaller for TrendMicro. So if somebody were to exploit you with this, TrendMicro would be uninstalled, which is funny in that it got rid of the bug, but it's also not funny in that now you no longer have antivirus. So this next link is actually a link to the proof of concept HTML. And if you want to know if you're vulnerable, it's really simple. It's just a matter of if you have TrendMicro installed, just you can open up your browser, and there's a link here that you can just drop into your browser to determine if you're vulnerable. So this next link that I'm posting here, you can see this one down here. It specifically calls out localhost :49155 /API/open URL in default browser, and then you can see in the URL is actually a path, C Windows System32 calc.exe. So if you have TrendMicro installed and you click on that link and calc pops up, you are vulnerable. So what really can you do about this? Well, as I see it, you have a couple of options. Number one, they push an update for this, so you can update your installation of TrendMicro. According to Tavis Ormandy, there's upwards of 70 other API calls, which might also be vulnerable to other sorts of attacks. So maybe option 2 or 3 would be better for you. Option 2 would just be completely uninstall TrendMicro, or maybe you can just uninstall the password manager. I don't know. Option 3 might be the best option if you don't want to install TrendMicro, and that would just be going into the control panel and going into local services and actually just disabling the password manager service. And that should cause it to no longer run and no longer be listening. So even though technically the program is still there making you vulnerable, it's not running, so no one can exploit it.
I know this is a little bit of personal opinion here, but reading that, the actual exchange back and forth between Trend, where they actually comment in regards to, is this vulnerable, and their suggested patches, it's a little bit terrifying, some of their suggested fixes and workarounds. So definitely not bashing on the Trend guys at all. But to me, I would feel very, very leery knowing that there's so many potential other API calls that could be abused, as well as the suggested fixes in that Project Zero bug report going back and forth. So I think myself personally, if I was dead set I needed to use Trend, especially for compliance reasons, the password manager service would be getting disabled ASAP.
Yeah. That's probably the easiest option to go with. Maybe the most technical knowledge, but you could easily Google and find how to disable a service. It's a couple of clicks, no problem. So this is really just a proof of concept. Although it works, this is not like this was actually came out.
I'm getting a little lag.
Can you hear me?
You able to hear me?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. The system was my box was crapping out. I must have got owned through TrendMicro or something. I don't know. So I was going to say the next thing we wanted to talk about was kind of something similar to this actually being used in the wild. So one of the big, I guess, not really milestones, but the big notable attacks where something like this, an antivirus has actually been used against people, would probably
Duqu 2.0 was really interesting because Kaspersky really holds their own when it comes to antivirus. And what was notable about Duqu to is not only did they attack an antivirus vendor, but they specifically leveraged the antivirus's capabilities to protect itself, to both hide or evade detection and actually protect the malware that was running. And even though the blog or the write-up that Kaspersky provides is very technical, lots of great details in regards to just what happened, how the actual Duqu authors themselves were able to patch in memory some of the actual drivers and protection mechanisms that were being used. I'm going to talk about it just as a high level for us. In general, with Duqu 2, one of the sexy capabilities that they had was they were able to manipulate essentially the Kaspersky product itself. So not only were they living within the context of the antivirus where it was essentially considered trusted, they actually went and there's a protection mechanism which, with that said, will prevent Kaspersky's actual product from being removed. However, the attacker in this example leveraged that functionality to guarantee that even a user with administrative privileges wouldn't be able to remove it because they leveraged the actual antivirus's own self-protection mechanisms. And I think that self-defense is just a one-up on where we'll continue to see this antivirus cat and mouse game. Whether it's just good old-fashioned evasion, whether it's initial access and bypassing, or in this case, this malware was aggressive enough to actually say, hey, you know what? Not only are you not going to catch me, but when you do find me, you're going to have to really work hard to remove me because it leveraged the antivirus's kernel capabilities to prevent the removal. With that said, I'll post a link to Kaspersky's Duqu write-up in case you didn't catch it when it came out. I think it was June 2015, and it's worthwhile or notable. I'll paste a little blurb real quick that really calls out just what went down. All right, Chris, with that said, we have a couple folks that are sitting here joining us. Anybody have any questions while we're still on the record?
Yeah, if you have questions, there's like the little box over here on the side. You can type /Q in the chat, or if you want, you can call in and get up on webcam and we can talk. If you don't want to do it on the record, basically when the show's over, I'll go ahead and pause the recording, and then you can get on and you can talk, and it won't be recorded. I can't actually stop the recording until we end the whole show, which will close everything out. So somebody asked me about that last week and said, hey, it doesn't say you stopped recording. It says it's paused. So I just wanted to clarify that there's no way through Blab to actually end the recording without ending the entire thing. So while we wait for people to chat in here, it'd be nice to kind of recap these three techniques, right? We started out with very unsophisticated, just leveraging exclusions to be able to get bypassing. And with that said, as a defensive vignette, it's important to be aware of what's being excluded in your enterprise. There's no reason nowadays for antivirus to not make it very transparent. But as we've seen, I'll post a link even to TrendMicro when I was investigating this earlier. They themselves have a product exclusion list, which we have in no way validated whether or not they work. But as the link I just provided demonstrates, sometimes the vendor will even go as outright as saying, this is what we exclude. So that's a good idea for defenders to monitor. Mm-hmm. As Chris said, remote code execution, that's one that's going to be very hard as a defender. But when it comes down to it, you really are trusting your antivirus that their software is secure enough to not only keep you protected, but to not enable any additional accesses. And lastly, even the best of them, Kaspersky themselves, when you have a truly sophisticated actor that's looking to come after you, with enough time and resources, it's liable that they'll find some way to abuse it. So once again, that's a good foot stomper for defense in depth. So even if your antivirus does go under, something else identifying your comms or complementing that capability is important. Yeah. Yeah, the big problem I see with the antivirus stuff is it's all really black box. So your defense in depth kind of has to treat it as a black box, but how many people even knew that the password manager was installed or that it could do all those, kind of things? Like, it looks like in there some of the APIs can be used to just dump all your passwords, and so like an attacker, if you just went to the wrong website, they run some code on there, they dump your passwords, they're all gone, right? The point of using a password manager is actually to try and secure your passwords and have better passwords. I don't know how you handle it because it is a black box.
So it doesn't look like we have any on the record questions today. With that said, Chris, do we want to wrap this up?
Sorry, I don't know. There's a
that's the TrendMicro getting you. I understand. Don't trust proof of concepts from the internet.
Yeah, they got me.
Yeah,
I run laps. I'm safe. So cool. All right. So if you have any questions, comments, stick around, and we'll try to hang out for a little bit afterwards and answer anything. Otherwise, like I said at the beginning of the show, you can tweet at us. We're at Tradecraft2s. Go ahead and follow us. That'd be great. We're trying to figure out how many people like the show, and tell your friends. Trying to expand the audience. If you like it, if you don't like it, let us know what you don't like, and we'll try to fix it or work around or whatever. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and hope to see you back here next week. Peace.